I let my sister say those words in front of 42 people, and I even smiled as if I were hearing a standard congratulation. I knew that the larger the audience, the sharper the truth would cut, so when she thrust a heavy ring of keys at me, I simply handed her back a white envelope. The kitchen went instantly silent, just as if someone had yanked the main power cord right out of the wall. My name is Madison Alexander. I am 33 years old, and in my professional life, I am a senior risk assessor for Harbor Vane Analytics. My job description essentially boils down to looking at a set of variables, determining the likelihood of disaster, and advising clients on how to avoid financial ruin. I am good at it. I am precise. I live in facts, spreadsheets, and the cold, hard reality of compound interest. I even run a modest podcast on the weekends called The Fiscal Anchor, where I teach people how to automate their savings and avoid lifestyle creep. Yet, as I sat in the driveway of the 4-bedroom colonial house in Matthews, North Carolina, staring at the odometer of my sedan, I knew I was about to walk into a disaster I had been subsidizing for 2 years. This was the family home. That is what my mother, Darlene, called it. That is what my father, Gordon, called it. It was the hub where we gathered for holidays, the place where memories were supposed to be made, but on the deed recorded in the Mecklenburg County Public Records, and on the mortgage statement that auto-debited from my personal checking account on the first of every month. It was simply an asset that was currently bleeding me dry. I checked my makeup in the rearview mirror. Neutral tones, professional, nothing flashy. I had learned a long time ago that looking too successful in front of my family was like bleeding in a shark tank. It triggered their hunger. I took a deep breath, grabbed the 2 pecan pies I had bought from a local bakery because I refused to cook for an army, and stepped out into the crisp November air. The house was already vibrating with noise. I could hear the bass of music and the roar of laughter through the front door. This was supposed to be a family Thanksgiving, but looking at the cars lining the street, it looked more like a block party. There were vehicles I did not recognize. A rusty pickup truck parked partially on the lawn I paid a landscaper to maintain. A sedan with an expired tag blocking the mailbox. I walked in, and the heat hit me first. Smelling of roasted turkey, sage, and too many bodies in too small a space. My mother had invited everyone, her church friends, neighbors from 3 streets over, people who I was fairly certain were just friends of my sister. It was a full house. By my quick head count as I navigated the entryway, there were at least 42 people crammed into the living and dining areas. "Madison, you are here!" my mother shrieked from the kitchen. She was wearing an apron that said Queen of the Kitchen, holding a glass of wine that I had likely paid for indirectly. "Put the pies on the counter. We are running behind on the turkey because the oven was acting up." "Hello, Mom," I said, my voice steady. I placed the pies down. "The oven is 6 months old. It should not be acting up." "Oh, you know technology," she waved a hand dismissively. "Go say hi to your sister. She has been waiting for you. She has big news." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. Brielle always had big news, and Brielle's news usually had a price tag attached to it. I found my sister in the living room, holding court. Brielle is 3 years younger than me, but she has occupied the role of the eternal child so effectively that one might think the age gap was a decade. She was sitting on the plush beige sofa, another purchase I had swiped my card for, flanked by her fiancé, Evan. Evan was a decent enough guy, a mechanic who seemed to shrink physically whenever money was discussed, but today he looked nervous. Brielle, however, looked radiant, or rather, she looked triumphant. "Maddie," she squealed. Not getting up, she patted the spot next to her, but it was occupied by a pile of gifts? No, not gifts. Swatches, fabric swatches, and paint chips. "I am so glad you made it. We have been dying to start dinner so I can make the announcement." "Hey, Brielle." "Hey, Evan," I said, keeping my distance. I stood near the wall. "What is the announcement?" "Not yet," she winked, a theatrical gesture that made the 3 women standing near her giggle. "At the table. Everyone needs to hear." Dinner was an exercise in logistical chaos, because there were over 40 people. The kids' table had expanded to include anyone who wasn't in the inner circle of importance. Despite paying the mortgage, the property taxes, the insurance, and the utilities, I found my place card at the far end of the long makeshift dining table, squeezed between a teenager I did not know and the drafty patio door. My name on the card was misspelled. Madison, 2 Ds. I sat down. I unfolded my napkin. I watched. My Aunt Rowan was seated across the room. She was my father's sister, a woman who spoke perhaps 10 sentences a year, but every single one of them could cut glass. She caught my eye over the centerpiece of plastic pumpkins. She gave me a single, almost imperceptible nod. She knew. I had not told her the specifics of today's plan, but she knew the climate was changing. The meal proceeded with the usual cacophony. People praised the food. My father, Gordon, sat at the head of the table, beaming like a benevolent patriarch presiding over a kingdom he had conquered. He raised his wineglass repeatedly, making vague toasts to family and togetherness, his eyes sliding right past me every time he scanned the room. Then, just as the pumpkin pie was being plated, Brielle stood up. She grabbed a spoon and tapped it against her wineglass. Ding, ding, ding. The room hushed. The 42 guests turned their attention to the center of the table. Brielle was wearing a flowing dress that hinted at a bump, though she was barely showing. She placed a hand on her stomach, posed like she was on the cover of a magazine, and smiled. "Thank you all for coming," Brielle began, her voice pitching up an octave into her influencer tone. "This year, Evan and I have the biggest blessing to be thankful for." She paused for dramatic effect. My mother was already clasping her hands together, tears welling up in her eyes, ready to perform her role as the overcome grandmother. "We just came from the specialist," Brielle announced, scanning the room to ensure all eyes were on her. "And we are not just having a baby, we are having triplets." The room detonated. Screams, applause, chairs scraping back as people stood up to cheer. My mother let out a wail of joy, rushing to hug my father. "3, Gordon, 3 grandbabies." I sat perfectly still. I took a sip of my water. I watched Evan. He was smiling. But it was a tight, terrified smile, the smile of a man who knows the math does not add up. Brielle soaked in the adoration for a full minute before she raised her hand to quiet the crowd. She was not done. "But," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial, yet loud volume, "obviously, this house is too small. We cannot fit 3 babies and us and Mom and Dad in here comfortably." She turned her gaze directly toward me. It was a spotlight, and she was the operator. "So," Brielle continued, grinning, "since Madison is the big-shot finance career woman, we have decided that Madison is going to buy us a bigger house." My mother clapped her hands together as if Brielle had just announced I won the Nobel Peace Prize. "Oh, it is perfect. A fresh start for the babies." My father nodded, a sagacious, approving nod. "It is only right. Family takes care of family. You have done well. Madison, you can handle it." The entitlement hung in the air, thick as the humidity in August. They did not ask. They announced. They assumed. To them, my bank account was not the result of 80-hour work weeks and skipped vacations. It was a communal reservoir. Brielle reached into her purse and pulled out a heavy ring of keys. She walked down the length of the table, the guests parting for her like she was royalty. She stopped in front of me and dropped the keys onto my bread plate with a loud clatter. "These are the keys to this place," Brielle said, loud enough for the neighbors in the next county to hear. "You can sell it or rent it out. I don't care. But we need to start looking this week. I have a list. I need 4 bedrooms, minimum, a big yard for a swing set, and it has to be in the Matthews area, so Mom can come over every day to help." She stood there, hands on her hips, waiting. The room was silent now. 42 pairs of eyes fixed on me, waiting for the capitulation, waiting for the good daughter to nod and say, "Of course, whatever you need." I looked at the keys. I looked at the grease stain they were leaving on the tablecloth. I looked up at my sister. Congratulations, I said. My voice was calm. It was the voice I used when I had to tell a client their portfolio had tanked because they bought meme stocks against my advice. Brielle beamed. I knew you would be excited. I already saw a place on Zillow that is— Actually, I interrupted, my volume rising just enough to cut her off. I have already found a house. Brielle froze. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second, then widened. You did? Oh my God. Madison, you are amazing. Where is it? Is it the one on Oak Street with the pool? My mother chimed in from the other end of the table. See? I told you Madison is always one step ahead. She takes care of us. I stood up slowly. I smoothed the front of my dress. I picked up the keys Brielle had dropped on my plate, feeling the cold metal in my palm. It is a lovely house, I said, looking directly into Brielle's eyes. It has 3 bedrooms, a home office, and it is very quiet. It is perfect. 3 bedrooms? Brielle frowned. Madison, I said triplets. 3 is tight, but I guess if the master is big enough. It is perfect, I repeated, enunciating every syllable. For me? The confusion rippled through the room. What? Brielle asked, a nervous laugh escaping her. What do you mean? For you. You have your apartment in the city. I gave notice on my apartment, I said. I am moving into my new house tomorrow. But, Brielle looked around, seeking support. But you are buying us the house. You have to. We are having triplets. We cannot stay here if it is just this. You are right, I said. You cannot stay here. I reached into my tote bag sitting on the floor. I pulled out a thick, white manila envelope. It was heavy. It contained 90 pages of legal documentation, chronologically sorted, highlighted, and notarized. I placed the envelope on the dessert table, right next to the pumpkin pie, with the deliberate care of a bomb technician placing a charge. This, I said, pointing to the envelope, is not a deed to a new house for you. It is the documentation regarding this house. My father stood up, his face flushing red. Madison, what is this nonsense? Sit down. You are embarrassing your sister. I am not embarrassing anyone, I said. I am clarifying the situation. Brielle said I am buying her a bigger house. I am clarifying that I am not. And I am also clarifying that I am no longer paying for this one. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a vacuum. No forks clattered, no one chewed. The festive Thanksgiving atmosphere evaporated, replaced by the sharp, metallic taste of reality. Brielle looked at the keys in my hand, then at the envelope. You can't just— I move tomorrow, I said again. And since you are growing your family, you will need to figure out your own housing, because I am selling this property. My mother gasped, a sound like a tire popping. Selling? You cannot sell our home. It is our home. It is a house, I corrected, and it is in my name, and I am done. I pushed the envelope slightly forward across the tablecloth. It is all in there, the mortgage transfer attempts you ignored, the notification of sale, the eviction timeline. The guests were exchanging glances. Some looked horrified. Others looked like they were watching a car crash and could not look away. Evan looked down at his plate, his face pale. You are ruining everything, Brielle shrieked, her face twisting from smugness to rage. On Thanksgiving, you selfish— Quiet, the word came from the corner of the room. It was not loud, but it had the authority of a gavel strike. Aunt Rowan stood up. She wiped her mouth with her napkin, folded it neatly, and placed it on the table. She walked over to the dessert table, the heels of her boots clicking rhythmically on the hardwood floor. She stopped between me and Brielle. She looked at Brielle, whose face was blotchy with angry tears. She looked at my parents, who were frozen in a tableau of disbelief. Then she looked at me. Her eyes were hard, intelligent, and for the first time in my life, I saw a flicker of pride in them. Give it here, Aunt Rowan said, extending a hand toward the envelope. Let me read it. I slid the envelope toward her. She picked it up, adjusted her reading glasses, and opened the clasp. The sound of the paper sliding out was the loudest thing in the world. "Let's see what we have here," Rowan said, her voice dry as dust. Nobody moved. The show was just beginning, while Aunt Rowan adjusted her glasses. The silence in the room stretched and warped, pulling me back to a place much older than this dining table. It pulled me back to the foundational architecture of my life, the blueprint that had been drawn up before I even knew how to read it, to understand why a 33-year-old woman would hand her family an eviction notice over dessert. You have to understand the mathematics of my childhood. In the Alexander household, love was treated like a finite resource, a pie that had been sliced unevenly from the very start. And unlike the pecan pies I had brought today, I was never the one holding the knife. I learned the rules of engagement early. The primary rule was the concept of sharing in most families. Sharing implies a reciprocal exchange. You give a little, you take a little. In our house, sharing was a unidirectional flow. It meant Madison gives, and Brielle takes. I remember my 10th birthday clearly. It was a joint party. Despite Brielle's birthday being 3 weeks after mine, my mother, Darlene, had decided it was more efficient to combine the celebrations. We had a party at the local roller rink. I had invited 3 friends from my reading club. Brielle, who was turning 7, had invited her entire first-grade class. When the cake was brought out, it was a massive sheet cake covered in bright pink frosting. Brielle's favorite color. I hated pink. I liked green, but the frosting was not the issue. The issue was the script written in flowing purple icing across the center. "Happy 7th birthday, Brielle." I stood there, wearing my roller skates, waiting for my name. It was not there. My mother, noticing my hesitation as the candles were lit, leaned down and whispered loudly enough for the parents standing nearby to hear. She said that the bakery must have made a mistake, but it did not matter because we all knew it was my day too. She told me not to make a scene. She told me to smile, so I smiled. I sang happy birthday to my sister at my own party. I watched her blow out the candles, and when the photos were taken, I was positioned slightly to the side, half shadowed by the balloon arch, while Brielle was center frame, holding the knife, beaming like the sun. That was the lesson, to be a good daughter. I had to be invisible. A good daughter did not require her name on the cake. A good daughter did not need the spotlight. A good daughter was a support beam, essential for the structure to stand, but completely covered by drywall and paint, so no one had to look at it. As we grew older, the currency changed from attention to actual capital. When I was 18, I was accepted into the state university with a partial scholarship. I had spent my high school years studying until my eyes burned, foregoing parties to pad my resume with extracurriculars. I presented the acceptance letter to my parents at the kitchen table, the same table we were sitting at now. Though it had fewer scratches then, my father, Gordon, read the letter. He looked at the tuition breakdown. He nodded. He said that it was good news because it meant I could handle the rest on my own. He said they were proud of my independence. 6 months later, Brielle barely graduated high school with a GPA that hovered near the basement. She decided she wanted to go to a private liberal arts college 3 states away because her boyfriend was going there. The tuition was triple what mine cost. My parents sat me down. They explained that Brielle needed more support than I did. They explained that I was the strong one, the capable one. Because I was capable, I was penalized. Because Brielle was sensitive and finding herself. She was subsidized. They took out a second mortgage to pay for her freshman year. They bought her a brand new convertible because the campus was hilly. I was driving a 10-year-old sedan that smelled like wet dog and shook when I went over 50 miles per hour. I did not argue. I did not scream. I internalized it. I told myself that their neglect was actually a compliment. It was a testament to my strength. I wore my neglect like a badge of honor, not realizing it was actually a target on my back. I graduated early. I got a job. I moved out. I started at Harbor Vane Analytics as a junior associate and worked like I was running from a fire. In a way, I was running from the feeling of being secondary. I thought if I made enough money, if I became successful enough, I could finally buy my way into the center of the frame. But the more money I made, the less real my work became to them. To my mother, my job was just typing on computers. To my father, it was playing with numbers. They did not understand risk assessment or market volatility, but they understood that my paycheck cleared every 2 weeks. Brielle, meanwhile, bounced from job to job. She was a receptionist, then a dog walker, then an aspiring makeup artist, then a lifestyle curator, whatever that meant. None of these ventures lasted longer than 6 months. Whenever she quit or was fired, usually with a dramatic story about how the boss was jealous of her, the family safety net deployed immediately, and I was part of the net. The text messages started coming when I was 24. "Hey sis, so sorry to bother you. My rent is due and my check from the salon hasn't cleared yet. Can you float me $500? I will pay you back next week. Love you. I sent the $500. I did not get it back next week." A month later. "Maddie, emergency. My car broke down. Need $300 for the tow. Mom and Dad are tight this month. Please? You have that fancy job." I sent the $300. It became a rhythm, a tax on my existence. If I hesitated, if I asked questions, the guilt trip was immediate. My mother would call me, her voice trembling. She would ask why I was being so hard on my sister. She would remind me that family helps family. She would ask if I had become a snob because of my big city money, so I paid. I paid to stop the guilt. I paid to keep the peace. I paid because, deep down, a pathetic part of me hoped that every transfer was purchasing a little bit of affection. But the ledger was one-sided. When I had surgery to remove my appendix, I took an Uber to the hospital. My parents visited for 20 minutes, then left because Brielle had a crisis involving a bad haircut. When I was promoted to senior assessor, I took them out to dinner to celebrate. Brielle ordered the most expensive steak and spent the entire meal complaining about her landlord. My promotion was never mentioned after the appetizers. I was the bank. You do not thank the ATM for giving you cash. You just expect it to work. The turning point came 3 years ago, at the funeral of my great-aunt Clara. It was a somber affair, gray and rainy. I was standing by the gravesite, holding an umbrella over my mother, who was wailing loudly. Brielle was in the car because she did not want to ruin her suede shoes in the mud. Aunt Rowan came up to me. Rowan was my father's older sister. She was a woman made of sharp angles and silence. She had never married, had no children, and lived in a small, immaculate house filled with books. The family called her eccentric. I called her terrifying. She stood next to me, looking at the casket. She did not look at me when she spoke. "You are waiting for them to change," Rowan said. Her voice was low, cutting under the sound of the rain. I looked at her, startled. "What?" "You are waiting for them to wake up and realize you are the good one," she continued. "You think if you give enough, if you are quiet enough, if you fix enough problems, they will finally see you." I felt a lump form in my throat. I could not speak. Rowan turned her head and looked me in the eyes. Her gaze was clinical, devoid of pity. "They will not change. Madison, they are a closed system. Your sister is the sun, and your parents are the planets. You are just the gravity that keeps them from flying apart. But gravity is invisible. Nobody thanks gravity until they start falling." "I don't know what else to do," I whispered. "Stop reacting," Rowan said. "Start observing. A scientist does not get angry at the virus for replicating. The scientist studies it. The scientist collects data." She reached out and patted my arm, a rare gesture of physical contact. "Don't fight the storm. Child, build a shelter, and keep the receipts." That night, I went home and opened a new folder on my laptop. I named it Project Archive. I stopped deleting Brielle's text messages. I screenshotted them. I exported them to PDF files. "Can you pay my credit card bill? It is only $2,000. I swear this is the last time. Mom said you would cover the family vacation deposits. Don't be cheap. Maddie, I need a deposit for the new apartment. $4,000. Transfer it now or I lose the place." I saved them all. I went into my bank statements. I went back 5 years. I highlighted every transfer to Brielle, to my mother, to my father, I created a spreadsheet. I categorized the expenses: emergency rent, car repairs, legal fees. For that time, Brielle scratched a parked car and drove off. Medical bills, lifestyle subsidies. I did not do this with anger. At first, it was painful. Seeing the numbers in black and white was nauseating. The total for the year I turned 29 was $24,000. That was a down payment on a house. That was a retirement fund. That was my life. Liquidated and poured into a black hole. But as the spreadsheet grew, my emotions cooled. The pain was replaced by a cold, hard clarity. Aunt Rowan was right. It was just data. When my father asked for money to fix the roof, I paid it directly to the contractor and saved the invoice. When my mother asked for money for groceries, I asked for the receipt and saved it. I stopped arguing. I stopped crying in the bathroom at work. I became a camera. I recorded everything. I logged the phone calls where my mother gaslit me. I saved the emails where my father promised to pay me back as soon as his investment matured, an investment that I knew did not exist. I tracked the flow of money like I tracked risk variables at Harborvane. I began to see the pattern. It wasn't just neediness, it was predation. It was a systemic extraction of resources. They had trained me to be the provider, and they punished me whenever I tried to resign from the position. The family home purchase 2 years ago was the ultimate test of my new philosophy. I knew it was a trap. I knew when I signed those papers, when I put down the deposit, that they had no intention of ever paying me back. But by then, I was not acting out of hope. I was acting out of strategy. I bought the house because I needed the asset in my name. I needed the leverage. I knew that eventually, the demands would escalate to a point of absurdity. I knew that one day, Brielle would want something I could not give or would not give. And when that day came, I needed to be holding the deed, not just the bill, so I let them play house. I let Brielle decorate the guest room I paid for. I let my mother host her prayer circles in the living room I furnished. I watched them post photos on social media captioned, "Blessed and Homeowner Life," conveniently omitting the fact that the homeowner was living in a one-bedroom apartment 20 miles away. I let them believe I was still the invisible support beam. I let them believe I was weak, pliable, and desperate for their approval. I was simply waiting for the market to correct itself. And sitting here today, watching Aunt Rowan pull the first sheet of paper from the envelope, seeing the confusion on my father's face and the rising panic in Brielle's eyes, I knew the correction had finally arrived. The data collection phase was over. The audit had begun. To understand how we arrived at the Thanksgiving massacre, we need to rewind the tape exactly 2 years. We need to go back to what I affectionately call the Great Consolidator Scheme. It began, as most catastrophes in my family do, with a medical overreaction and a rent hike. My father, Gordon, had suffered what the doctors called a minor cardiac event, and what my mother, Darlene, called the day the earth stood still, in medical terms. He had high blood pressure and needed to cut back on sodium. In Darlene's terms, he was practically on his deathbed and required 24-hour surveillance. Simultaneously, Brielle was facing a crisis of her own. Her landlord had the audacity to raise the rent on her trendy downtown loft by $75 a month. To hear Brielle tell it, this was a human rights violation on par with a war crime. She was distraught. She claimed the stress was making her hair fall out, which was tragic because she spent more on hair products than I spent on my car insurance. So, a family summit was called. We gathered in the living room of my parents' old rental, a cramped duplex that smelled permanently of mothballs and despair. My mother sat me down on the lumpy armchair, served me a cup of lukewarm tea, and pitched the idea. "We need a hub," she said, her eyes wide and pleading. "A family hub. Your father needs peace and quiet. Brielle needs stability. We are spending so much money on separate rents. It is wasteful. Madison, you know finance. Isn't it wasteful?" The logic, on the surface, was sound. Consolidating 3 households into one property should theoretically save money. It is a classic economy of scale. However, My family does not operate on economies of scale. They operate on economies of parasitism. The plan, my father explained, looking surprisingly robust for a man allegedly at death's door, is to buy a nice, large house in Matthews. Plenty of room. We all move in. We split the costs. We build equity instead of throwing money away on rent. That sounds reasonable, I had said, foolishly. Have you looked at mortgage rates? Well, my mother interjected, patting my hand. That is where we hit a small snag. You see, your father's medical bills hit our credit score a little bit, and Brielle, well, being a freelancer is hard on paper. I knew what was coming. I could feel it in my wallet, a phantom pain. We need you to sign for the house, Brielle said, popping a grape into her mouth. She said it casually, like she was asking me to sign for a UPS package. Just for the paperwork, you have that fancy corporate job. Your credit score is, perfect. I am not buying a house for all of us to live in, I said. I like my apartment. I like my silence. No, no, no. My mother rushed to correct me. You don't have to live there if you don't want to. You keep your apartment, but you buy the house as an investment. We will pay the mortgage. We pay the utilities. You just put your name on the paper so the bank says yes. It keeps the asset in the family. It is strictly a credit score thing. Just temporary. Temporary, I repeated. 6 months, my father promised. A year, tops, once my pension readjusts and Brielle gets her new jewelry business off the ground. We refinance and put it in our names. You are just the bridge. Maddie, you are the bridge to our safety. I looked at my father. He did look tired. I looked at my mother, who was wringing her hands. I looked at Brielle, who for once looked genuinely worried about where she was going to sleep next month. The guilt hit me. It is a specific frequency of guilt that only families can broadcast. It bypasses logic and goes straight to the part of your brain that remembers being 5 years old and wanting them to be proud of you. Fine, I said, but you pay the mortgage, every month, on time. Of course, they chorused. The process of buying the house was a masterclass in anxiety. Because I was the only one with verifiable income, the bank scrutinized every cent I had. I spent weeks gathering pay stubs, tax returns, and letters of explanation. When we found the house, a sprawling 4-bedroom beige beast in a subdivision called Whispering Pines, Brielle fell in love immediately. She walked through the rooms, pointing out where her yoga studio would go, where she would set up her ring light for streaming, where the breakfast nook would be. She did not look at the furnace. She did not check the roof. She looked at the aesthetics. I looked at the price tag, $550,000. It is a lot, I told the realtor. It is an investment, the realtor assured me, looking at my designer handbag and assuming I had money to burn. The closing day was etched into my memory. I sat in a conference room with a mahogany table, signing my name roughly 100 times, my hand cramped. Every signature felt like I was signing away a piece of my freedom. When it came time for the monies due at signing, the room went quiet. The down payment and closing costs came to a total of $68,422. My father patted his pockets. I seemed to have forgotten my checkbook. My mother looked at her shoes. Brielle was checking her Instagram. I will write the check, I said, my voice hollow. We will pay you back, my mother whispered aggressively. As soon as the tax refund comes, as soon as we settle the old duplex. I wrote the check. $68,000, gone. The move-in happened 2 weeks later. I hired the movers because my father's back was acting up, and Brielle had a manicure appointment she could not reschedule. I watched as they unpacked. Brielle immediately claimed the master suite. It had a walk-in closet the size of my entire kitchen and a soaking tub. I need the space for my creative process, she explained. My parents took the second largest room with the ensuite bathroom. What about this room? I asked, pointing to the 3rd bedroom. Guest room, my mother chirped, for when Aunt Rowan visits, or for your future nieces and nephews. And where would I sleep if I stayed over? I asked. Oh, the sofa is very comfortable, Brielle said. It is memory foam. I went back to my apartment that night, a 600-square-foot box in the city that cost me $2,000 a month. I sat on my non-memory foam floor and drank a glass of cheap wine. I owned a $500,000 home in the suburbs, and I was drinking wine on the floor of a rental. The first month, the mortgage payment was due on the first, $2,800. I sent a group text on the 25th. Reminder: mortgage is due next week. Please transfer the funds to my account. My mother replied, Can we do it on the 5th? Dad's Social Security check is late. I paid the mortgage on the 1st to avoid a late fee. They transferred the money on the 8th, short $200. We had to buy groceries to stock the new pantry. My mother explained. We will catch up next month. The second month. Hey, Maddie. Brielle texted. My car needed new tires. Safety first. Can you cover my half this month? I will double up next time. I paid the mortgage. By the 4th month, the request for money stopped coming. They just stopped mentioning it. When I brought it up, the atmosphere would turn icy. Why are you so obsessed with money? My mother would snap. Your father is stressed. His blood pressure is up. Do you want him to have a stroke over a bank transfer? I just want you to pay for the house you live in, I would say. We are family, she would cry. We don't count pennies. $2,800 is not pennies. It is a lot of pennies. 280,000 pennies, to be exact. I started visiting the house less and less. It was painful, not just financially, but viscerally. I would drive over to drop off my father's specialty supplements that I also paid for, and I would see the transformation. The house was no longer a house. It was a shrine to Brielle. She had painted the front door a violently bright turquoise. She had filled the living room with boho chic furniture that looked like it was made of wicker and bad intentions. There were signs everywhere. Live, laugh, love in the hallway. In this house, we do real in the kitchen, boss babe on the door of the study, which was supposed to be a home office but was now filled with racks of clothes she was trying to resell online. I walked in one Saturday to find Brielle filming a TikTok in the kitchen. She was wearing an apron I had bought her, whisking air in a bowl I had paid for, standing in a kitchen I owned. Hey guys, she chirped to her phone. Welcome back to my cozy Saturday baking vlog in my new kitchen. I am so obsessed with this granite island. Hard work pays off, you know? She saw me standing in the doorway. She did not stop recording. She just angled the camera away so I wouldn't ruin the aesthetic. I checked my phone. The mortgage notification had just come through. Payment processed. $2,800. Hard work, I muttered to myself. I went to find my father. He was in the backyard, sitting on a new riding lawnmower. Nice mower, I said. Needed it for the acreage, he said, looking proud. Got a great deal on financing. 0 down. Dad, I said, you haven't paid the mortgage in 3 months. He sighed, a long, weary sound that suggested I was physically exhausting him. Madison, please, I am handling it. The market is volatile right now. My investments are tied up. Brielle is having a hard time. She is very stressed. The algorithm changed on her social media, and she lost engagement. It is very hard on her mental health. What about my mental health? I asked. I am paying 2 rents. You are strong, he said, starting the engine of the mower to drown me out. You always manage. That was the refrain. I was strong, so I could bleed. They were weak, so they needed to be fed. I realized then that the temporary arrangement was a lie. It was never going to be 6 months. It was never going to be a year. They had found a host, and they had burrowed in deep. The house was not a hub. It was a prison. And I was the warden who was also paying for the prisoner's cable TV. Every time I walked through that front door, I felt like a stranger. I had to knock to enter my own property. I had to ask for a glass of water in a kitchen I bought. If I stayed for dinner, my mother would make a big show of hosting me, acting like she was doing me a favor by feeding me a casserole made with ingredients I had probably paid for indirectly. Thank you was a phrase that had been excited from their vocabulary. Instead, I got, When we have it, we will pay you. But they never had it. They had money for the lawnmower. They had money for Brielle's highlights. They had money for the premium cable package so Dad could watch golf. They just didn't have money for me. The house became a physical manifestation of my resentment. Every beige wall, every throw pillow, every blade of grass in that yard mocked me. It was a monument to my inability to say no. It was a monthly bill that came with a side order of gaslighting. And the worst part? Brielle truly believed it was hers. She had internalized the lie so deeply that she forgot the truth. One afternoon, 6 months ago, I mentioned that I might need to sell the house if interest rates shifted or if I lost my job. Brielle looked at me with genuine horror. "You can't sell my house," she said. "I have built my brand here. The lighting in the sunroom is crucial for my content. It is my house." "Brielle," I said, "my name is on the deed." She rolled her eyes. "Paperwork," she scoffed. "It is our home. You are just the bank. Banks don't evict families. That is illegal. Or at least, it is mean." I looked at her. I looked at the Boss Babe sign on the door. And I realized that she was right about one thing. I was the bank. But what she forgot is that banks inevitably foreclose when the borrower defaults. I stopped arguing that day. I stopped asking for the transfer. I just smiled, nodded, and went home to my small apartment. I opened my laptop. I opened Project Archive. And I started a new subfolder titled Foreclosure Strategy. Because if I was going to be the bank, I was going to start acting like one, cold, unfeeling, and entirely focused on the bottom line. The house wasn't a home anymore. It was just a liability on a spreadsheet, and I was getting ready to liquidate it. The weeks leading up to Thanksgiving were not filled with the warm, cinnamon-scented anticipation of the holidays. Instead, they were filled with a strange, pressurized atmosphere, like the air inside a submarine that had gone too deep. The change in my family was subtle at first, a shift in frequency that only a paranoid person or a risk assessor would notice. I happened to be both. It started in late October. Every time I visited the house in Matthews to drop off medication for my father, or handle a minor repair that Brielle was too overwhelmed to manage, the conversation would inevitably drift toward the architecture of the house itself, but it was not the usual complaints about a drafty window or a squeaky floorboard. It was a structural dissatisfaction. Brielle would stand in the center of the living room, hands on her hips, scanning the space with a critical eye. She would say that the open concept felt suffocating. She would claim that if one were to introduce a playpen or a high chair into the environment, the flow of chi would be completely blocked. One Sunday afternoon, while I was fixing a leaking faucet in the kitchen, because plumbers cost money and my time was apparently free, Brielle leaned against the counter. She was eating a yogurt I had paid for. She looked at me and said that this place was barely big enough for 3 adults. She asked me to imagine if there were children. She asked what we would do then. I kept wrenching the pipe. I told her that since there were no children, it was a hypothetical problem. My mother, Darlene, immediately chimed in from the dining room. She said that one must always plan for the future. She said that children need space to run and grow. She said that a cramped house stunts a child's spirit, just like a small pot stunts a flower. My father, Gordon, sat in his recliner, staring intently at the Weather Channel. He did not look at me. He nodded in agreement with my mother, but his eyes never left the screen. It was the body language of a man who knew a secret and was terrified of spilling it. Then came the specific comments. Brielle stopped asking if we should move and started talking about when we moved. She mentioned a new development on the other side of town, a gated community where the houses were 3,000 square feet minimum. She said we should go look at open houses after the holiday madness settles, speaking with the confidence of someone who had already secured the financing. I did not engage. I nodded. I let them talk. But internally, my radar was pinging. Something had shifted. They were no longer content with just leeching off the current host. They were looking to upgrade to a bigger organism. The confirmation that I was dealing with a conspiracy rather than just ungratefulness came 3 days later. On a Tuesday morning, I was at my apartment, working remotely, I logged into my primary banking portal to schedule the utility payments for the Matthews house. Usually, the dashboard was a sea of green check marks, but this time, a red banner flashed across the top of the screen. Security alert. Recent changes to your contact information may affect your access. I froze. I had not changed my contact information. I clicked on the Profile tab. My primary email address was still there, but a secondary email had been added. It was brielle*88@gmail.com. My phone number for two-factor authentication had been labeled old, and a new number, my mother's landline, had been added as home. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine that had nothing to do with the thermostat. This was not an accident. You do not accidentally navigate through 4 layers of security settings to add your own email address to someone else's mortgage portal. I immediately reverted the changes. I changed my password to a string of random characters that would take a supercomputer a century to crack. Then, I dug deeper. I went to the Documents tab. I looked at the download history. Someone had downloaded my last 3 tax returns. Someone had downloaded the original deed. And someone had downloaded a payoff quote for the current mortgage. Why would they need a payoff quote? I navigated to the credit monitoring service I subscribed to. A perk of working in finance is being paranoid about identity theft. I pulled my full credit report, and there it was, a hard inquiry from a lender I did not recognize. It was dated 2 weeks ago. The inquiry type was listed as HELOC application, a home equity line of credit. My heart stopped, then hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. They had tried to take out a loan against the equity in my house. Since I had been paying down the principal aggressively and the market value had risen, there was roughly $50,000 of available equity in the property. They had tried to steal $50,000. I looked at the status of the inquiry. Canceled/insufficient authorization. They had failed. They had likely gotten to the final stage where a notary or a biometric verification was required. And they had panicked or hit a wall they could not climb. That explained the canceled status. And that explained the sudden push for a new, bigger house. They couldn't tap this house for cash. So they wanted me to sell it, buy a bigger one, and likely structure the new deal in a way that gave them access to the fresh capital. I sat back in my ergonomic chair. I was shaking. This was not family dysfunction. This was attempted financial fraud. If I were a stranger, I could have had them arrested. I reached for my phone to call my mother and scream. I wanted to drive over there and throw the printed credit report in their faces. I wanted to burn the bridge right then and there. But then I heard Aunt Rowan's voice in my head. Don't react. Observe. I put the phone down. I took a deep breath. Confronting them now would only give them a chance to lie. They would say it was a mistake. They would say they were just checking rates. They would gaslight me until I doubted my own eyes. I needed a weapon sharper than anger. I called Aunt Rowan. They tried to take out a HELOC, I said when she answered. I did not say hello. There was a pause on the line. Then Rowan said, I know. You know? Your mother bragged to me that they were coming into some money soon, Rowan said. She said they were going to unlock the potential of the house. I suspected they were up to something stupid. I did not think they were up to something criminal. I need to end this. Rowan, I said. I can't do this anymore. I am going to sell the house. Good, Rowan said. But do not do it alone. You are an emotional novice. Madison, you need a shark. I work in finance. I know sharks. You know corporate sharks, Rowan corrected. You need a real estate shark. Write this name down. Naomi Keller. Naomi Keller's office was in a glass tower in uptown Charlotte, the kind of building that looked down on the rest of the city with cold indifference. Naomi herself was a woman who looked like she had been carved out of marble. She wore a suit that cost more than Brielle's car, and she did not smile when I walked in. She simply pointed to the chair opposite her desk. Rowan says you are the family doormat, Naomi said, opening a fresh legal pad, and that you are looking to become the door. I sat down. I want to sell my house. My family lives in it. They think it is theirs. They just tried to forge a loan application in my name. Naomi raised an eyebrow. Do you have proof? I reached into my bag and pulled out the binder. Project, Archive. I placed it on her desk. It was 3 inches thick. I have everything, I said. Bank statements showing every mortgage payment came from my personal account. The text messages where they admit they can't pay. The email from 2 years ago where my mother explicitly states that my name on the deed is just for credit purposes and acknowledges they have no ownership claim. The log of the IP address that accessed my bank account last Tuesday, which matches the IP address of the router in the Matthews house. Naomi opened the binder. She flipped through the pages. Her eyes scanned the highlighted rows of my spreadsheets. She read the printed screenshots of Brielle's manipulative texts. After 5 minutes, she looked up. The expression on her face was no longer indifferent. It was the look of a predator who had just been served a prime steak. "This is excellent," Naomi said. "Usually, family disputes are messy." She said, emotional hearsay. "But this is forensic. You have documented your own exploitation perfectly." She tapped a finger on the page showing the HELOC inquiry. "This is the kill shot," Naomi said. "Attempted fraud negates any equitable interest argument they might try to make. They cannot claim they contributed to the home's value when they were actively trying to strip the equity out of it." "So, what do I do?" I asked. "Do I serve them an eviction notice today?" Naomi leaned back. "You could, but North Carolina law requires a notice period. If we serve them now, they have 30 days. They will spend those 30 days destroying the property, bad-mouthing you to the entire extended family, and possibly trying to squat. We need to be smarter. We need to sell the house before they even know they are being evicted." "How?" "We list it," Naomi said. "I have a broker who can list it as a private pocket listing for 48 hours to get investors interested. We get a cash offer. We accept it. Then, we present your family with the fait accompli. The house is sold. The new owners take possession in 30 days. It is not you kicking them out. It is the terms of the sale." "They want me to look at new houses this week," I said. "Brielle thinks I am buying her a mansion." "Let her think that," Naomi said. "Let them feel safe. Let them feel victorious. People are careless when they think they have won." She looked me dead in the eyes. "Madison, listen to me. A house is where people live. That is the sentimental definition. But in a court of law, and in the real world, the paperwork is where the truth lives. You have the paperwork. You have the power. Stop acting like you need their permission to use it." I nodded. "Thanksgiving," I said. "What?" "We are having a huge Thanksgiving dinner," I said. 40 people, 40 go. Friends, neighbors, church members. Brielle loves an audience. She is going to make a scene about the new house she thinks she is getting." Naomi's lips curled into a terrifyingly sharp smile. "An audience is good. Witnesses are better. If you serve them the papers in private, they will lie about what happened. If you do it in front of 40 people, the truth is public record." She slid a document across the desk toward me. It was a listing agreement for the property in Matthews. "Sign this," Naomi said, "and I will have the for sale sign in the trunk of my agent's car, waiting for your signal." I picked up the pen. My hand did not shake. I thought about the canceled HELOC application. I thought about the guest room that was never mine. I thought about the years of being the invisible wallet. I signed my name. "One more thing," Naomi said as she took the paper back. "They are going to say you are cruel. They are going to say you are heartless. Are you ready for that?" "They have been saying I am cold for years," I said. Standing up, I might as well finally get the benefit of the temperature. I walked out of the glass tower and into the November chill. I drove to the grocery store. I bought 2 pecan pies. I bought a new dress, something structured and dark. I went home and waited. I watched the calendar pages turn. I answered Brielle's texts with vague thumbs-up emojis. I listened to my mother's voicemails about the menu without offering to pay for the turkey. I was done being the victim. I was done being the bank. Thanksgiving was coming, and for the first time in my life, I was looking forward to carving the bird. Because this year, I knew exactly where the knife was going to go. The gravel of the driveway crunched under the tires of my sedan as I pulled in, a sound that felt disproportionately loud in the quiet of my own car. I checked my reflection in the visor mirror one last time. I was wearing a charcoal gray sweater and simple black slacks, no jewelry, no designer watch. I had pulled my hair back into a low, severe bun. This was a calculated costume choice. In the Alexander ecosystem, my success was a double-edged sword. If I dressed too nicely, I was flaunting it and making them feel inadequate, which justified their requests for money as a form of wealth redistribution. If I dressed too poorly, I was embarrassing the family and needed to step up. Today, I aimed for the precise middle ground, invisible. I wanted to look like a background extra in the movie of Brielle's life. I grabbed the 2 pecan pies from the passenger seat. They were from a high-end bakery, but I had transferred them into generic Tupperware containers before leaving my apartment. I did not want to give my mother the satisfaction of critiquing the bakery's logo or looking up the price online to complain that I spent too much on sugar when the roof allegedly needed repairs. I stepped out of the car and walked toward the house. My house. The house where the front lawn was currently being trampled by an alarming number of vehicles. I had expected family. I had expected maybe the odd neighbor. I had not expected a festival. When I opened the front door, the wall of sound hit me physically. It was a dense, humid mixture of laughter, clinking silverware, and the overly loud bass of a pop playlist Brielle must have curated. I navigated through the entryway, dodging a woman I recognized as the church choir director and a man who I was fairly certain was my father's golf buddy. The guest count was staggering. By my quick estimation, scanning the living room and the overflow into the kitchen, there were at least 40 people here. My mother had invited her entire social circle. Brielle had invited her squad, a group of 4 women who all dressed identically in beige and posted synchronized photos on social media. Even the neighbors from 3 doors down, people I had never actually seen my parents speak to, were standing by the fireplace holding beer bottles. This was not a dinner. This was an audience. "Madison, you made it!" My mother, Darlene, materialized from the kitchen steam. She was wearing a dress that was a little too tight and a little too sparkly for a Thursday afternoon. Her face was flushed with the high of hosting a successful event. "Hello, Mom," I said, holding up the Tupperware. "I brought the pies." "Oh, wonderful," she said, barely glancing at them. "Just stick them on the counter. We are running a bit behind. The turkey is taking forever. Go find your seat." We set up a big table in the dining room and extended it into the living room. I made my way through the crowd. I kept my head down, offering tight, polite smiles to the people who greeted me. I felt like a ghost haunting my own property. These people were drinking wine I effectively paid for, standing on hardwood floors I maintained, warming themselves with heat I subsidized. And yet, I was the intruder. I found the dining table. It was a masterpiece of mismatched engineering. The main mahogany table, followed by a card table, followed by a folding plastic table covered in a white cloth. I walked along the perimeter, looking for my place card. At the head of the table, facing the window and the best light, were 2 large, throne-like chairs. The place cards there were written in gold calligraphy, Brielle and Evan. I continued down the line, past my parents' spots, past the choir director, past the golf buddy, past Brielle's friends. I finally found my spot at the very end of the plastic folding table. Squeezed near the sliding glass door that led to the patio, it was the overflow section, populated by teenagers and distant cousins I hadn't seen in a decade. I looked at the card. Madison, 2 Ds. I stared at the extra letter. My mother had named me. She had written my name on birth certificates, school forms, and immunization records for 33 years. And yet, here it was, Madison. It wasn't a typo. It was a microaggression. It was a subtle way of saying that the details of my identity were not important enough to double-check. It was a way of making me a stranger. I pulled out the metal folding chair and sat down. The draft from the sliding door was cold against my back. I adjusted my sweater, across the room, near the buffet. I saw Aunt Rowan. She was wearing a dark purple blazer and holding a glass of sparkling water. She was not mingling. She was standing perfectly still, like a statue in a garden of chaotic weeds. She caught my eye. She did not smile. She simply raised her glass an inch and gave a single, sharp nod. It was the signal. Stay the course. I felt the weight of the envelope in the inside pocket of my tote bag, which I had placed between my feet. It was a thick, reassuring weight. Inside were the deed, the mortgage statements showing $68,000 in payments over 2 years, the unauthorized HELOC application log, and the signed listing agreement with Naomi Keller's agency. It was my shield and my sword. "Hey, Maddie!" I looked up. Brielle was floating toward me, holding a glass of champagne, or sparkling cider, given the news she was about to drop. She looked immaculate. Her hair was blown out in soft waves. Her makeup was professional grade, and she was wearing a cream-colored dress that looked expensive. "Hey, Brielle," I said. "You look—" She tilted her head, scanning my gray sweater. "Cozy, very librarian chic. I like to be comfortable," I said. "Well, at least you are here," she said, flashing a bright, empty smile. "I was worried you might be working. You are always working. Do you even have a life outside of those spreadsheets?" "Someone has to work," I said, keeping my voice neutral. She laughed, a tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. "Don't be such a downer. It is Thanksgiving. Be grateful. By the way, Evan and I were looking at paint swatches for the nursery. We are thinking sage green." "Sage is nice," I said. "Yeah, but the light in the current guest room is terrible for sage," she said, dropping the hint with the subtlety of a brick. "We really need big windows, southern-facing, you know?" "I know windows make a difference," I agreed. Giving her nothing, she frowned slightly, annoyed that I wasn't taking the bait. "Anyway, enjoy the kids' table. Sorry about the seating. Mom wanted the fun people near the center." She turned and floated away before I could respond. Dinner was served 20 minutes later. The noise level rose as platters of turkey, stuffing, and mashed potatoes were passed down the long line. I took small portions. I ate mechanically. I wasn't hungry. My adrenaline was suppressing my appetite. I spent the meal observing Evan. He was seated next to Brielle at the head of the table, but he didn't look like a king. He looked exhausted. There were dark circles under his eyes that the ambient lighting couldn't hide. He was a mechanic, a man who worked with his hands, and I knew for a fact he worked overtime. "Great turkey, Mrs. Alexander," Evan said, his voice polite but weary. "Thank you." "Evan," my mother beamed. "You eat up. You're going to need your strength." "Yeah," Brielle said loudly, placing a hand on Evan's arm. "Big changes coming. Expensive changes," she giggled. I saw Evan flinch, just a tiny tightening of the jaw. "We will figure it out," Evan murmured, taking a long drink of his water. "I picked up extra shifts at the shop. The holiday pay is double time." "Oh, stop worrying," Brielle said, waving her fork. "The universe provides. Besides, we have family support. Right, Daddy?" "Absolutely," my father boomed from down the table. "We take care of our own." Evan looked down at his plate. He didn't look reassured. He looked like a man who was drowning and being told that water was good for hydration. He knew the math didn't work. He knew Brielle's spending habits. He just didn't know I was the one plugging the holes in the hull. I felt a pang of sympathy for him. He was about to be collateral damage, but I couldn't save him. To save myself, I had to let the whole ship go down. The dinner seemed to last for hours. I endured questions from the distant cousins about why I was still single. "Are you too picky? Do men find your job intimidating?" I endured my mother's loud praises of Brielle's homemaking skills, even though the house was cleaned by a service I paid for. I endured the feeling of being an ATM that had developed sentience and was being ignored in the corner. Finally, the plates were cleared, the coffee was poured, the pies, my store-bought pecan pies and a pumpkin pie my mother had made, were brought out. The atmosphere in the room shifted. It was the preamble to the main event. Everyone seemed to know something was coming. The whispers died down. I reached down and unzipped my tote bag. I felt the cool paper of the envelope. I slid it out and placed it on my lap, hidden under the tablecloth. Brielle stood up. She smoothed her dress. She looked around the room, making eye contact with her key supporters. She looked at our parents. She looked at her friends. And finally, she looked at me, all the way at the end of the table. Her smile was predatory. She had the keys in her hand. I could hear them jingle softly. She picked up her spoon and tapped it against the side of her wine glass. Clink, clink, clink. The room went silent. 42 faces turned toward her. "Attention, everyone," Brielle said, her voice trembling with theatrical emotion. "If I could have your attention, please." My mother clasped her hands to her chest. My father sat up straighter. "Evan and I have been keeping a little secret," Brielle said, reaching down to pull Evan up to stand beside her. He stood awkwardly, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. "We wanted to share it with all the people we love most in the world," Brielle continued. "Because this isn't just our joy, it is the family's joy." She paused. She took a deep breath. "I am pregnant," she announced. A gasp went through the room, followed by the beginning of applause, but she held up a hand to stop it. "Wait," she said, beaming. "I am not just pregnant. We just came from the doctor." She looked directly at me. "I am pregnant with triplets." The room exploded. It was a chaotic release of noise. My mother screamed. My father pounded the table. The squad shrieked in unison. I sat perfectly still. My hands were resting on the envelope in my lap. I watched Brielle bask in the attention. I watched her soak it up like a dry sponge. She waited for the noise to subside slightly. Then she delivered the second half of the punchline, the part that involved me. "But obviously," she shouted over the dying applause, "3 babies means we have outgrown this place." She swept her arm around the room, gesturing to the walls I owned. "So," she said, her voice ringing with entitlement, "Madison is going to buy us a bigger house." The crowd turned to look at me. They were smiling. They were clapping. They thought this was a generous gift. They thought this was a beautiful, sisterly gesture. They had no idea they were watching a mugging. Brielle started walking toward me. She had the keys in her hand. She was coming to claim her prize. I took the envelope from my lap. I placed it on the table next to my untouched coffee. I looked at Aunt Rowan. She gave me one last, imperceptible nod. Action. I stood up. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just stood there, a gray figure in a room full of color, holding the paperwork that would burn it all to the ground. "Congratulations," I said, my voice cutting through the murmurs. The room quieted to hear my response. "Triplets," I said. "That is a lot of responsibility." "It is," Brielle laughed. Finally reaching my end of the table, she thrust the keys toward me. "So we need to start looking this week. I have a list. 4 bedrooms, big yard, close to Mom." I looked at the keys. I looked at her face. "Actually," I said clearly, "I have already found a house." Brielle's eyes lit up. "You did? Oh my God. Madison, where is it?" "It is perfect," I said. "For me?" The smile froze on her face. "What?" "I am moving tomorrow," I said, "into my new house." "But," she laughed nervously, "but you are buying us the house. You have to. We are having triplets." "No," I said. "I am not." I picked up the envelope and held it out. Not to her, but to the space between us. "And I am selling this one." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and absolutely perfect. The word triplets hung in the air above the centerpiece of plastic pumpkins for exactly 1 second before the room detonated. It was a physical explosion of sound. My mother, Darlene, let out a shriek that could have shattered crystal, if we owned any. She threw her hands up in the air, tears instantly springing to her eyes, as if on command, and rushed to embrace my father. My father, Gordon, stood up so quickly his chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor, floors I had paid to have refinished last spring, and opened his arms to engulf his daughter. The 42 guests followed suit. It was a cacophony of "oh my God" and blessings, and the frantic shuffling of bodies trying to get closer to the miracle. Smartphones were raised in the air like lighters at a concert. I saw flashes going off. I saw the red recording dots of at least 10 different devices. The squad, Brielle's beige-clad friends, were already huddled together, likely drafting captions about how their bestie was a supermom in the making. Brielle stood in the center of it all, soaking it in. She looked radiant, flushed with the absolute certainty that she was the main character of the universe. She hugged our mother. She kissed our father on the cheek, and she kept one hand protectively over her stomach, which was currently flat enough to balance a checkbook on. Evan, the father of these 3 theoretical children, looked less like a man who had won the lottery and more like a man who had just been handed a subpoena. He was smiling, but it was a tight, grimace-like expression. He was doing the math. I could see the numbers scrolling behind his eyes. The cost of diapers for 3. The cost of a minivan. The cost of simply existing multiplied by 300%. I sat in my folding chair at the edge of the room, my hands resting calmly on the white tablecloth. I did not stand up. I did not cheer. I took a small, deliberate sip of my lukewarm coffee. Aunt Rowan was still standing by the buffet table. She had not moved. She was watching the room with the detached fascination of an anthropologist observing a tribal ritual that involved human sacrifice. She caught my eye again. She did not blink. When the initial wave of hysteria began to ebb, Brielle raised her hands for silence. She was not done. The announcement was just the hook. Now came the ask. "Thank you. Thank you all so much," she gushed, her voice pitching up into that breathy, innocent register she used whenever she needed money. "We are so overwhelmed, but, there is a reality to this blessing." She turned her body so she was facing me directly. The camera lenses pivoted with her. I was now in the frame, the supportive sister character. "Obviously," Brielle said, her voice carrying clearly to the back of the room. "This house is too small. We love it here, but we cannot fit 3 babies and mom and dad in a 4-bedroom house. It just won't work." She smiled at me. It was a weaponized smile. It was daring me to contradict her in front of the choir director and the neighbors. "So," Brielle announced, loud and clear, "Madison is going to buy us a bigger house." "Right, Madison?" The room turned to me. The guests were smiling, nodding, waiting for the heartwarming moment where the successful older sister pledges her allegiance to the family crown. They thought this was a choreographed bit of good news. They thought I was in on it. "Isn't that amazing?" my mother chirped, wiping her eyes. "Madison always takes care of us. She is the rock." "A bigger house for the triplets," someone shouted from the back, and a ripple of applause started. Brielle walked over to me. She reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out the heavy ring of keys, the keys to the house we were currently standing in. She held them out to me, dangling them like a carrot. "Here," she said, loud enough for the video recordings to pick up every syllable. "You can handle selling this one or renting it out, whatever you want to do with your investment, but we need to start looking this week. I found a listing in Weddington, 4 bedrooms, a sunroom, a massive backyard for the kids." She thrust the keys toward my hand. She expected me to take them. She expected me to close my fingers around them and seal the contract. I looked at the keys. I looked at the grease stain on the tablecloth where she had dropped them earlier. Before picking them up for this performance, I reached out and took the keys. Brielle's smile widened. She turned slightly to the audience, ready to accept their adoration. "Congratulations," I said. My voice was not loud, but it was clear. The room quieted down to hear the touching speech they assumed was coming. "Triplets," I continued, weighing the keys in my palm. "That is a significant development." "It is huge," Brielle agreed, beaming. "That is why we need the new place ASAP. I was thinking we could go look on Saturday." "Actually," I said, looking her dead in the eyes, "I have already found a house." The air in the room shifted slightly. Brielle blinked, This was not the script. But then, her brain reconfigured the information. She decided this was even better news. "You did?" she gasped, clutching Evan's arm. "Oh my God. Madison, you are fast. Where is it? Is it the one with the pool I sent you?" My mother clapped her hands together. "See? I told you. Madison is always one step ahead. She probably knew you needed space before you even asked." The guests murmured appreciatively. What a good sister. What a generous family. I stood up slowly. I smoothed the front of my charcoal sweater. I held the keys up, letting the light catch the metal. "It is a beautiful house," I said. 3 bedrooms, a quiet office, a small garden. Brielle's face fell slightly. 3 bedrooms? Madison, I just said triplets. 3 is too small. Unless the basement is finished. But we really need 4, and I hope it isn't too far from Mom. "It is perfect," I said, my voice dropping an octave, becoming dead serious. "For me?" Brielle froze. Her smile twitched, uncertain. "What?" "The house I found," I said, enunciating every word. "It is for me. I signed the lease yesterday. I am moving tomorrow." The silence that descended on the room was instantaneous and absolute. It was the kind of silence that happens when a car crash occurs right in front of you, the moment between the impact and the scream. "For you?" Brielle stammered. She looked around at the guests, her face flushing pink. "I don't get it. Why do you need a house? You have your apartment." "I gave notice on my apartment," I said. "And I'm not buying you a house. Brielle, not in Weddington, not anywhere." My mother stepped forward, her face draining of color. She sensed the danger now. She saw the look in my eyes, a look she hadn't seen since I was 18 and leaving for college. "Madison," she hissed, her voice low and frantic. "Don't do this. Not now. Not in front of everyone. We can talk about this later." "There is nothing to talk about," I said. Brielle asked a question. I am answering it. She said I am buying her a bigger house. I am clarifying that I am not. "But the triplets!" Brielle's voice rose to a shrill pitch. "We can't stay here. It is too small." "You are right," I said. "You can't stay here." I placed the keys gently onto the table. Then, I reached for the thick white envelope I had placed next to my coffee cup. "Because I am selling this house." The gasp from the crowd was audible this time. It wasn't a happy gasp. It was a shocked, scandalized intake of breath. You can't," Brielle sputtered. "This is our home. You can't just sell our home. That is illegal." "It is not your home," I said calmly. "It is my house. My name is on the deed. My name is on the mortgage. My money pays for it. It is a family asset," my father shouted. Standing up and trying to regain control of the room, he looked furious, his face turning a mottled red. "Madison, stop this nonsense immediately. You are drunk." "I have been drinking water all night, Dad," I said. "And this is not nonsense. This is business." I held up the envelope. "This contains the listing agreement I signed yesterday," I said to the room at large. "It also contains a full record of every payment made on this property for the last 2 years. $68,422, all from my personal account." I looked at Evan. He was staring at me, his mouth slightly open. "Evan," I said, "you might want to see the section on the recent credit inquiry, the HELOC application that was submitted in my name without my consent." Brielle went pale. She looked like she was going to be sick. "That was a mistake," she screamed. "We were just checking rates. We were going to tell you." "Checking rates requires a signature," I said. "And you didn't have mine." My mother grabbed my arm. Her grip was tight, her nails digging into my sweater. "Madison, please, people are watching. You are humiliating your sister on her big day. Just put the envelope away. We will work it out. We always work it out." "No, Mom," I said, pulling my arm away. "I always work it out. You just wait for the check to clear." I looked at the crowd. They were paralyzed. The phones were still recording. But the captions were definitely going to change. They were witnessing the collapse of the perfect family narrative in real time. "I am done being the bank," I said. "And I am done being the bad guy for asking to be paid back." I placed the envelope in the center of the table, right next to the pumpkin pie. It looked like a verdict. "I don't expect you to believe me," I said to Brielle, who was now crying angry, ugly tears. "You have told yourself I am the villain for so long that you probably believe the house really is yours." I turned my head and looked toward the buffet table. "Aunt Rowan," I called out. Rowan moved instantly. She did not hesitate. She walked through the crowd, which parted for her like the Red Sea. She walked with a purpose that made my father sit back down in his chair. Rowan stopped at the table. She looked at me, and for the briefest second, her eyes crinkled at the corners. Pride. "Yes, Madison?" Rowan asked. "Would you mind reading this?" I asked, gesturing to the envelope. "My family seems to be having trouble understanding the legal terminology. I think they need an impartial translator." "I would be happy to," Rowan said. She reached out and picked up the envelope. Her hands were steady. Brielle lunged forward. "No, don't touch that. It is private." Rowan turned and looked at Brielle. It was a look so cold it could have frozen helium. "You made it public, my dear," Rowan said, her voice dry and sharp as a razor. "You asked for a bigger house in front of 42 people. Now we are going to see exactly what kind of house you can afford." Rowan opened the clasp of the envelope. She pulled out the stack of documents. She put on her reading glasses. "Let us start with page 1, Rowan announced, her voice projecting to the back of the room. "The general warranty deed. Grantee, Madison Alexander, not Gordon Alexander, not Darlene Alexander, and certainly not Brielle Alexander." The room was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Brielle looked at Evan, panic rising in her chest. She realized, for the first time in her life, that the script had been rewritten. And she did not have any lines. The power had shifted. The person holding the paper was not her mother, who would cover for her. It was not her father, who would indulge her. It was Rowan, and Rowan did not negotiate with terrorists. "Page 2, Rowan continued, flipping the sheet with a snap. "Mortgage payment history, account holder, Madison Alexander, cosigners, none." My mother sank into her chair, covering her face with her hands. My father looked at the floor. I picked up my purse. I looked at Brielle one last time. "Happy Thanksgiving," I said, and then I let Rowan read the rest. The silence in the dining room was not empty. It was heavy, pressurized, and vibrating with the kinetic energy of a guillotine blade that had just been released but had not yet hit the neck. Aunt Rowan stood by the dessert table, the white envelope open in her hands. She adjusted her reading glasses, the lenses reflecting the overhead chandelier, and looked down at the first document with the clinical detachment of a coroner examining a particularly interesting corpse. "Document number 1, Rowan announced, her voice cutting through the thick atmosphere like a scalpel. "This is a general warranty deed, recorded in the Mecklenburg County Public Registry." She paused, letting the legal weight of the words settle over the room. My mother, Darlene, was gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles were white. My father, Gordon, was staring at the centerpiece, his face a mask of crumbling denial. He looked like a man who had just been slapped, not with a hand, but with a reality he had spent 2 years ignoring. Rowan continued. "Property address, 1142, Whispering Pines Lane. Grantor, the Whispering Pines Development Group, grantee." Rowan looked up over the rim of her glasses, scanning the room until her gaze landed on Brielle. "The grantee is the legal owner, the person whose name is on the title, the person who owns the dirt, the bricks, and the air inside the structure." She looked back down at the paper. "Grantee, Madison Alexander." A collective murmur rippled through the guests. It was the sound of 42 people simultaneously realizing they had been lied to. Brielle let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. It sounded like glass breaking. "No," she said, shaking her head violently. "That is wrong. That is just paperwork. It is a technicality." She turned to the guests, her hands flying up in a gesture of appeal. "You guys know. This is our house. Mom and Dad picked it out. I decorated it. Madison just signed some forms because her credit was better at the time. It doesn't mean she owns it." Rowan did not argue. She simply flipped the page. The sound of the paper turning was crisp and loud. "Document number 2, Rowan read. "The promissory note and deed of trust. This outlines the mortgage obligation. Borrower, Madison Alexander. Co-borrowers, none." Rowan looked at my father. "Gordon, I don't see your signature here. I don't see Darlene's. I certainly don't see Brielle's." "It was a bridge loan," Brielle shouted, her face flushing a deep, ugly red. "We were going to refinance. We are just waiting for the market to turn." "Let us look at the payment history," Rowan said. Ignoring the outburst, she pulled out a spreadsheet, the one I had color-coded with such loving care. "This is an official transaction record from First National Bank, cross-referenced with the mortgage servicer's ledger." Rowan ran her finger down the column. "Down payment, $68,422. Source of funds, Madison Alexander. Personal savings account ending in 4491. My mother let out a small whimper. "Monthly mortgage payments," Rowan continued, her voice relentless. $2,800 a month for 24 months. Source of funds, Madison Alexander. Direct debit." Rowan looked up. "I see a few transfers here from Darlene Alexander. Let me see Here is one for $200 labeled groceries. Here is another for $50 labeled cable bill. But curiously, I do not see a single cent allocated toward the principal or interest of the loan." The guests were whispering openly now. The narrative of the generous family hub was dissolving, replaced by the image of a parasite draining a host. My mother suddenly stood up. She looked frantic, her eyes darting around the room, seeing the judgment on the faces of her church friends. "It was just temporary," she cried out, her voice cracking. "You are twisting it. Rowan, Madison agreed to stand in for us because our credit took a hit when Gordon got sick. We didn't want to lose the opportunity. It was just a name on a piece of paper to help the family." I spoke then. I didn't stand up. I didn't raise my voice. I just leaned forward slightly. "Temporary," I repeated. My mother flinched as if I had thrown a stone at her. "You said 6 months," I said. "It has been 2 years. Temporary is a time frame. Mom, 2 years without a single mortgage payment isn't temporary. It is a habit. It is a lifestyle." "We were going to pay you back," Brielle shrieked. "When Dad's settlement came in, when my business took off, you know we were good for it." "I know nothing of the sort," I said. "I know what the math says, and the math says you are tenants who haven't paid rent in 24 months. Evan, who had been standing next to Brielle like a statue, suddenly moved. He stepped away from her. It was a small step, maybe 6 inches, but it felt like he had crossed an ocean. "Wait," Evan said. His voice was confused, heavy with the slow dawning horror of realization. He looked at Brielle. "Brielle, you told me your parents bought this house cash. You told me the house fund we were saving was for renovations." The room went dead silent. This was a new twist. The guests leaned in. Brielle whipped her head around to look at him. "Evan, not now. Don't be stupid." "No," Evan said, and his voice gained a little more strength. "You told me Madison lived in an apartment because she liked the city. You said this place was paid off. You said your dad wrote a check for $500,000. He looked at my father. "Gordon, did you tell her that?" My father couldn't meet his eyes. He found a sudden, intense interest in his fingernails. "It is complicated, son," my father mumbled. "Financial structures are complex. You wouldn't understand." "I understand who pays the bills," Evan said. He looked back at Brielle. "If Madison owns the house, and she pays the mortgage, Then where's the money I have been giving you going? Brielle's eyes went wide. She grabbed his arm, her fingernails digging into his jacket. "Shut up," she hissed. It wasn't a request. It was a command. "Shut up, Evan. We are discussing family business. You don't know what you're talking about." "I am talking about $2,000 a month," Evan shouted back, finally snapping. "I have been giving you $2,000 a month for the house fund to pay back your dad. If your dad didn't buy the house, who am I paying?" The crowd gasped. The dynamic had shifted from a family dispute to a potential embezzlement case right before their eyes. "Evan, stop it!" Brielle screamed, tears streaming down her face. But they weren't the cute, victim tears she usually cried. These were panic tears. "You are ruining everything. You are ruining the announcement." "The announcement," I said calmly from my seat, "was that I was buying you a bigger house. I think we have established that isn't happening." I looked at Aunt Rowan. "Aunt Rowan? I believe there is one more document in that stack, the one with the date stamp." Rowan nodded. She shuffled the papers, moving the deed and the mortgage statements to the back. She pulled out a single, crisp sheet of paper with a bold logo at the top. "Document number 3, Rowan read. "Exclusive right to sell listing agreement." She held it up so the room could see the logo. It was the logo of the most aggressive luxury real estate firm in Charlotte. "Property, 1142, Whispering Pines Lane." Rowan read, "Seller, Madison Alexander, listing price, $625,000. She paused for effect. "Date signed," Rowan said, her voice dropping to a grave whisper. "November 14th. She looked over her glasses at Brielle. "That was 2 weeks ago," Rowan clarified for the room. 2 weeks before today, 2 weeks before anyone knew about any triplets. The implication hit the room like a physical blow. Brielle had accused me of reacting out of jealousy, of trying to ruin her moment, but the date on the paper proved that this wasn't a reaction. This was a plan. I hadn't decided to sell the house because she was pregnant. I had decided to sell the house because I was done. Brielle stared at the paper in Rowan's hand. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The timeline destroyed her victim narrative. She couldn't claim I was evicting a pregnant woman out of spite. I was selling my asset according to a schedule that predated her announcement. "You," Brielle whispered, her voice trembling with genuine shock. "You were planning this? You were going to sell it out from under us?" "I am selling my property," I corrected. "And I gave you notice. You just didn't read the mail because you were too busy hiding it from me." "What mail?" my mother asked, her voice shrill. "The certified letter I sent 3 days ago," I said. "The one notifying you of the listing, the one you probably threw in the trash or hid in a drawer, thinking if you didn't open it, it wasn't real." My father looked up. "Madison, you can't do this. Where will we go? You have a moral obligation to your family." "I have a contractual obligation to the buyers," I said. "And according to this agreement," I pointed to the paper in Rowan's hand, "the house goes on the market publicly on Monday. But the private listing started 48 hours ago." I took a sip of my coffee. "In fact," I added, "there is a showing scheduled for tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, so you might want to clean up the confetti." The room was frozen. The joy of the triplet announcement was a distant memory. The air was thick with the smell of roasted turkey and burning bridges. Evan looked at Brielle, then at me, then at the door. He looked like a man measuring the distance to the exit. My mother looked at the camera phones that were still recording. Realizing that her performance as the matriarch of a successful, loving family had just been canceled, Brielle looked at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. "I hate you," she hissed. "I hate you so much." "I know," I said. "But hatred doesn't pay the mortgage, and neither do you." I turned to Rowan. "Thank you, Aunt Rowan. I think that covers the required reading for the evening." Rowan closed the folder with a definitive snap. She placed it back on the table, right next to the keys Brielle had tried to force into my hand. "The defense rests," Rowan said, "and for the first time in 20 years. The silence in the room wasn't because I was being ignored, it was because I was finally being heard. The silence that Aunt Rowan had commanded did not last long. In my family, silence is not a moment of reflection. It is a vacuum that must be filled immediately with noise, usually the noise of victimhood. Brielle looked at the documents spread across the table, the deed, the mortgage history, the listing agreement. She looked at them as if they were radioactive materials that had been planted there to frame her. When she realized she could not argue with the ink and the stamps, she did what she always does when cornered by logic. She pivoted to biology. "You can't do this," Brielle screamed, her voice cracking into a register that set my teeth on edge. She placed both hands protectively over her stomach, which was currently housing a fetus the size of a blueberry, though she held it like she was ready to deliver. "I am pregnant, Madison. I am carrying triplets. You cannot evict a pregnant woman. There are laws against that. You are a monster." The crowd, which had been swaying toward the truth, hesitated. The image of a pregnant woman being thrown out into the snow, even though it was a mild November and she had a car, was a powerful visual. My mother, sensing an opening, rushed to Brielle's side, throwing an arm around her. "She is right," Darlene sobbed, looking directly at the camera phone of the choir director. "Where is your humanity, Madison? These are your nieces or nephews. You would throw them on the street?" I watched them perform. It was a scene I had watched 1,000 times in smaller venues, but the large audience gave them extra energy. They were banking on the fact that I would be too embarrassed to enforce my rights in front of the neighbors. I didn't speak. I didn't have to. Aunt Rowan, who was still standing by the table, reached into her blazer pocket and pulled out her smartphone. She tapped the screen once and set the device down on the table. Right next to the pumpkin pie, she pressed the speaker icon. "Go ahead, Naomi," Rowan said. The voice that came out of the phone was not loud, but it was crystal clear. It had the distinct, metallic timbre of a woman who charges $600 an hour and does not bill for small talk. "This is Naomi Keller, legal counsel for Ms. Madison Alexander," the voice said. The room went quiet again. The introduction of a lawyer into a Thanksgiving dinner is a sobering event. "I am listening to this conversation," Naomi continued, her tone bored but sharp. "And I would like to clarify a point of law regarding the tenancy at 1142 Whispering Pines Lane. In the state of North Carolina, a tenant who does not pay rent and has no lease agreement is considered a tenant at will. However, given the familial relationship, my client has opted to provide a 30-day notice to vacate, which is legally sufficient." "We are not tenants," Brielle shouted at the phone. "We are family." "The law does not distinguish between family members and strangers when it comes to property rights," Naomi replied, her voice cutting through Brielle's hysteria like a hot knife through butter. "Furthermore, regarding the claim of evicting a pregnant woman, I must inform you that pregnancy is not a protected class that grants immunity from eviction due to sale of property or non-payment. The notice has been served via certified mail to the residents 3 days ago. The clock began ticking then. You have 27 days remaining." Naomi paused, then added a final, chilling detail. "Any damage done to the property between now and the vacancy date will be pursued in civil court. I have photos of the interior condition from the insurance inspection last month. I suggest you pack carefully." Rowan tapped the phone and ended the call. The silence this time was different. It wasn't shocked. It was fearful. The abstract threat of selling the house had just been solidified into a concrete legal deadline, 27 days. Brielle looked at the phone, then at me. Her face was pale. She opened her mouth to scream again, to launch another emotional assault, but she was interrupted. "Wait," the word came from Evan. He had been standing slightly behind Brielle, looking like a man who had been hit over the head with a shovel. But now, he stepped forward. He walked past Brielle. He walked past my mother. He came to the table where the documents were spread out. He didn't look at the deed. He didn't look at the listing agreement. He reached for the spreadsheet Aunt Rowan had read from earlier, the one detailing the payment history. "Evan, baby, don't look at that," Brielle said, her voice trembling. She reached out to grab his arm, but he pulled away violently. "Don't touch me," Evan said. It was the first time I had ever heard him speak to her without adoration. He picked up the spreadsheet. His hands were shaking. Grease from the garage permanently etched into his cuticles. He scanned the columns. He was looking for something specific. "Madison," Evan said, not looking up. "You said you paid the mortgage, every month, $2,800. "That is correct," I said. "And you have paid it for 2 years?" "Every single month," I confirmed. "Direct debit from my salary." Evan looked up. His eyes were red, but they were dry. He looked at Brielle, who was now shrinking back against the buffet table. "Then what is the house fund?" Evan asked. His voice was quiet, dangerously quiet. Brielle laughed, a high-pitched, nervous sound. "Evan, honey, we talked about this. It is for repairs and the future. It is a savings account." "No," Evan said. "No. Brielle, you told me the mortgage was under your dad's name, but we had to pay him back a little each month because he helped us get in. You told me we had to contribute $2,000 a month to the equity pool. You made me pick up overtime shifts. You made me sell my motorcycle." The crowd gasped. Selling a motorcycle is a universal language of sacrifice for a young man. "I gave you $2,400 a month for the last 18 months, Evan said, his voice rising. "I wrote the checks to you. You said you were transferring it to your dad." He turned to my father. "Gordon, did you ever get a check from me? Did you ever see a dime of my money?" My father, who had been trying to make himself invisible in his chair, looked up. He looked at Evan, then at Brielle. He was a weak man, but he was not suicidal enough to lie when there was a paper trail. "I never handled the finances," Gordon stammered. "Brielle said she was handling the household accounts." Evan turned back to Brielle. "So Madison pays the mortgage, your dad pays nothing, and I pay you." He took a step closer to her. "Where is the money?" "Brielle, that is over $40,000. Where is it?" "It is in an account," Brielle cried, tears streaming down her face again. "I was saving it for the nursery, for the triplets. I was going to surprise you." I cleared my throat. "Actually," I said, "I can help with that." I reached into my bag and pulled out a second, smaller envelope. This was the one my private investigator, a service Naomi had recommended, had compiled. When I noticed the irregularities in my own credit report, I said, addressing the room, I did a full audit of the household finances to prepare for the sale. Since Brielle used my address for her banking, some of her statements came here. I slid a single sheet of paper across the table toward Evan. "That is a summary of the account ending in 882, I said. "The one you deposit your checks into." Evan picked it up. He read the entries out loud. Sephora, $400. Revolve Clothing, $600. Delta Airlines, $800. Ticketmaster, $500. The Ritz-Carlton Spa. He stopped reading. He looked up at Brielle. The look on his face was not anger anymore. It was disgust. "You spent it," he whispered. "You spent the house money. You spent my motorcycle money. I needed to maintain my image," Brielle sobbed, finally cracking. "I am an influencer. I have to look a certain way. I was doing it for us, Evan, so we could get brand deals, so we could be rich." "You stole from me," Evan said. "She didn't steal," my mother shrieked, jumping in to defend her golden child. "It was a misunderstanding. She was investing in her career, and she is carrying your children. How dare you attack her over money when she is pregnant with triplets?" A voice from the back of the room cut through the noise. It was the neighbor, the one holding a beer. "Damn," the neighbor said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "She scammed her own fiancé? That is cold." The energy in the room shifted violently. Before, I was the villain for kicking out family. But stealing from a working man? Stealing from the father of your children? That crossed a line that even the most devout family-first advocates couldn't ignore. The camera phones were still recording, but now they were zooming in on Brielle's tear-streaked face. "Wait," I said. "I am not done." I stood up and walked to the table. I picked up the document Rowan had read earlier, the HELOC inquiry. "The spending money is one thing," I said. "That is between Evan and Brielle. But this," I tapped the paper, "this is between Brielle and the federal government." I looked at my sister. She had stopped crying. She was staring at the paper in my hand with the terrified look of an animal in a trap. "For those of you who don't know finance," I said to the room, "a HELOC is a home equity line of credit. It is a loan secured by your house. To get one, you need to be the owner. You need to sign legal affidavits." I held up the paper. 2 weeks ago, an application was submitted to SunTrust Bank for a $50,000 line of credit against this house. It was submitted online. The electronic signature was Madison Alexander, but the IP address it was sent from was this house, and the email address associated with the application was Brielle*88. My mother gasped. She actually put her hand over her mouth. "That is identity theft," I said. "That is bank fraud. That is a felony." I looked at Brielle. "I have the log files. I have the IP trace. I have the rejection letter that came to my email because, unlike you, I have credit monitoring alerts set up." Brielle was shaking. She looked at our parents, desperate for them to fix it. "Mom, Dad, tell her to stop. It wasn't we were just going to borrow it. We were going to pay it back." "You tried to mortgage a house you don't own," I said. "You tried to put me $50,000 in debt without my knowledge, and you were going to use that money for what? More clothes? A down payment on a house you couldn't afford?" My father, Gordon, made a sound. It was a low groan. He slowly sank back into his chair, his legs giving out. He looked at me, and for the first time, he didn't see the daughter he could bully. He saw a stranger. He saw the magnitude of what they had done. They hadn't just used me. They had tried to cannibalize me, and they had been caught. "Gordon," my mother whispered, shaking his shoulder. "Gordon, say something." But Gordon said nothing. He just stared at the tablecloth, defeated. My mother looked around the room. She saw the faces of her friends. The choir director looked horrified. The neighbors looked entertained but judgmental. The squad had lowered their phones, looking at Brielle like she was a contagion. My mother realized then that the house was the least of her problems. The story of the perfect Alexander family was dead. The generous, successful daughter narrative was dead. The blessed, pregnant Brielle narrative was dead. All that was left was the truth, and the truth was ugly. "Madison," my mother pleaded, her voice a whisper, terrified of the lenses pointing at her. "Please, the cameras. Everyone is watching. Let's go to the kitchen. Please." "No," I said. "I like the lighting out here." I looked at Evan. "You have a choice, Evan," I said. "You can stay here and wait for the eviction notice to run out, or you can leave." Evan didn't hesitate. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring, a modest engagement ring that he must have saved for months to buy. He placed it on the table next to the keys. "I'm out," Evan said. He turned and walked toward the front door. "Evan, no, the babies!" Brielle screamed, running after him. "You can't leave me. I am having triplets." Evan stopped at the door. He turned back. He looked at her stomach, then at her face. "I don't believe you," he said, and then he walked out. The front door slammed shut, echoing through the silent house like a gunshot. I picked up my purse. I looked at my parents, sitting in the ruins of their Thanksgiving dinner. "I suggest you start packing," I said. Naomi wasn't joking about the damages. I nodded to Aunt Rowan. She smiled, closed the folder, and followed me toward the door. We left them there. 42 guests, 2 pecan pies, and a lifetime of lies that had finally collapsed under their own weight. The morning after the Thanksgiving massacre was quiet. It was the kind of silence that usually follows a heavy storm. where the air feels scrubbed clean and the world looks sharper, more defined. I woke up not in my childhood bedroom, nor in the cramped city apartment I had occupied for years, but in a hotel room. I had booked it for one night to bridge the gap between my old life and my new one. At 8 o'clock, I drove to Fort Mill. It was just across the South Carolina border. Close enough to Charlotte for work, but far enough to feel like a different jurisdiction. The townhouse I had leased was modest. It was a 2-story brick unit in a quiet development called Baxter Village. It had a small front porch, a home office with a window that looked out onto a line of oak trees, and most importantly, it had a lock that only I possessed the key to. I pulled into the driveway. A white van was already parked there. 3 people were standing by the back of the van, unloading boxes. They weren't family. They were people I knew from the digital world. Sarah, my podcast co-host who lived in Raleigh, Mark, a data analyst I had mentored at Harbor Vane, and David, a listener of the show who ran a local moving company and had insisted on helping when I mentioned I was downsizing. "Madison," Sarah waved, holding a box labeled "Kitchen, Fragile." "We started without you. David is a machine. He already moved the sofa in." "You guys didn't have to be this early," I said. Getting out of the car. "Hey, you saved me from a bankruptcy with your advice last year." David grinned, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Moving a few boxes is the least I can do. Besides, I want to hear the full story about the pie incident." I smiled. It was a genuine smile. Not the tight, performative grimace I wore around my family. These were people who operated on a transactional basis of respect, not guilt. They said they would help, and they showed up. No drama, no demands. We spent the morning moving my life into the new space. It didn't take long. I had purged most of my possessions before leaving the apartment. I wanted a clean slate. By noon, the boxes were in their respective rooms, and we were sitting on the floor of the living room eating pizza. "So," Mark asked, taking a bite of pepperoni, "did they actually try to get a HELOC in your name?" $50,000, I confirmed. I have the rejection letter framed in my mind. "That is wild." Sarah shook her head. "You know most people would have caved, right? The pressure to keep the peace is insane." "I kept the peace for 33 years, I said, looking around my empty, quiet living room. "Now I am keeping the house." After they left, I sat down at my new desk. It was time for the administrative purge. I opened my laptop. I logged into my bank account. The first thing I did was cancel the recurring transfer for the mortgage on the Whispering Pines house. I felt a physical weight lift off my chest as I clicked Delete Series. That was $2,800 a month that was now mine. Next, I went through the utilities: Duke Energy, Piedmont Natural Gas, the water department, the cable company. I removed my credit card from all of them. I set the termination date for exactly 30 days from yesterday, the day the notice to vacate expired. Until then, they could enjoy the lights. After that, they could sit in the dark or pay for it themselves. I went to the credit bureaus. I placed a permanent freeze on my credit reports with Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. I set up a fraud alert that required a phone call to my personal cell for any new inquiry. I changed my email passwords. I changed my social media passwords. I removed my mother as an emergency contact from my HR file at work and replaced her with Aunt Rowan. I was methodical. I was surgical. I was severing the arteries that had fed the parasite for decades. My phone buzzed. It was a voicemail. I didn't answer calls from them anymore. I played the message. It was Brielle. "Madison? Maddie? Please pick up. Look, I am sorry about yesterday. I was emotional. The hormones, you know? But seriously, this isn't funny anymore. Evan left. He actually left. And I am scared. The triplets, I can feel them kicking. And stress is bad for the babies. You need to fix this. Call me back, please." Her voice started out weepy and ended on that familiar, sickly sweet note of manipulation. I am scared. Fix this. I didn't feel a pang of guilt. I felt nothing. I realized then that she was lying even in her apology. I can feel them kicking. At 8 weeks, a fetus is the size of a kidney bean. You don't feel kicking, you feel gas. I deleted the message. I didn't listen to the rest. I blocked her number. I blocked my mother's number. I blocked my father's number. I set up an email filter so that any messages from them would skip my inbox and go directly to a folder labeled legal/family at 4 o'clock. There was a knock on my door. I froze. Nobody knew where I lived except Aunt Rowan and the friends who had just left. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. It was my mother. She was standing on the porch, holding a casserole dish covered in aluminum foil. She looked smaller than she had the day before. Her hair was a little messy. She was wearing a coat I had bought her 3 Christmases ago. I didn't open the door immediately. I stood there, debating. If I opened it, I was breaking my own rule. If I didn't, she would stand there until the neighbors called the police. I unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door. But I stood in the threshold, blocking the entrance. I didn't step back. I didn't invite her in. "Madison," she breathed, looking relieved. "Oh, thank God. Rowan wouldn't tell me where you were, but I found the address in your father's old contact book. You must have updated it years ago." She held out the casserole. "I made your favorite, tuna noodle." I looked at the dish. I hadn't liked tuna noodle casserole since I was 12. "What do you want, Mom?" I asked. "I just want to talk," she said, her eyes filling with tears. "Family business. Can I come in? It is cold." "No," I said. "We can talk here." She looked shocked. "Madison, I am your mother. You are going to make me stand on the porch?" "Yes," I said. "Because if you come in, you will start measuring the curtains. You will ask how much the rent is. You will ask why I have a spare room if I'm not going to let Brielle use it. I am keeping this space clean." She lowered the casserole. "We are in trouble, Madison. Your father, he is not doing well. The stress of yesterday, and Brielle is hysterical. Evan is gone. He took his truck and left. We need you to come home and help us sort this out. We need to explain to Evan that it was just a misunderstanding." "It wasn't a misunderstanding," I said. "It was theft. Brielle stole his money." "She borrowed it," my mother snapped, her voice hardening. "She is your sister. Why do you hate her so much?" "I don't hate her," I said. "I just refuse to pay for her anymore." I looked at my mother. Really looked at her. I saw the fear in her eyes. It wasn't fear for my father's health. It wasn't fear for Brielle's babies. It was the fear of a manager who had lost her star employee and didn't know how to run the factory alone. "Listen to me," I said, my voice steady. "I am not coming back. The house is sold. The closing is in 30 days. You have to move. We have nowhere to go." "You have the money from the sale of the duplex 2 years ago," I said. "You have Dad's pension. You have Brielle's savings if she hasn't spent it all on shoes. Figure it out." "You are heartless," she spat. "I am practical," I said. "And here are the new rules. If Dad needs to go to the doctor, you email me the appointment time. I will pick him up, drive him there, pay the copay directly to the desk, and drive him home. I will not give you cash. I will not give Brielle cash. I will not discuss the house. If you show up here unannounced again, I will call the police for trespassing." My mother stepped back as if I had slapped her. "You wouldn't?" "Try me," I said. She stared at me for a long moment, searching for the compliant daughter she had raised. She didn't find her. She found a landlord. She turned around and walked back to her car, still holding the tuna noodle casserole. She didn't look back. I closed the door. I locked the deadbolt. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood and breathed. An hour later, I got an email. It was from Evan. Subject: Verification Madison. I am staying at a motel. I am trying to make sense of the last 2 years. I need to know if I am crazy. Can you send me the proof? The payment history? I need to see it in black and white. I didn't type a long, sympathetic reply. I didn't tell him I was sorry. I didn't want to get dragged into his emotional processing. I simply attached the PDF summary of the mortgage payments and the ledger of the house fund deposits versus the actual mortgage account. Attached. Requested _ documents ... PD if I hit send. That evening, I opened my laptop to check the fallout. I went to Brielle's social media page. I knew she wouldn't be able to stay silent. She had posted a long, text-heavy image on Instagram. Some families are toxic. Some people let money change them. Imagine kicking your pregnant sister out on the street just to make a profit. Heartbroken single mom. Karma will come. The comments were flooding in. At first, they were supportive. Oh my God, stay strong, babe. That is evil. Who does that? But then, the tide began to turn. The people who had been at the party, or who had heard the whispers, started to chime in. Wait, didn't she pay for the house for 2 years? I heard the house was in her name the whole time. Why is the deed in her name if it is your house? And then, a comment from a user I recognized as one of Evan's friends. Did you give Evan his money back yet? The 40 grand? Brielle deleted the post 10 minutes later. I closed the laptop. I walked into my small, quiet kitchen. I made myself a cup of tea. I stood by the window and looked out at the streetlights of Fort Mill. There was no shouting. There was no drama. There was just the quiet hum of a refrigerator that I paid for, in a house that I rented, in a life that finally belonged to me. I realized then that Aunt Rowan was right. The opposite of love isn't hate. It's indifference. And the most effective revenge isn't a scream. It's a boundary. I had built a wall, brick by brick, document by document, and for the first time, I was safe behind it. The 30 days leading up to the closing of the house were not a quiet countdown. They were a siege. As the reality of the sale set in, Brielle and my mother shifted tactics from denial to guerrilla warfare. They realized they couldn't stop the legal sale, so they decided to make the process as expensive and emotionally draining as possible, hoping I would pay a ransom to make them go away. It culminated 3 days before the final signing. Naomi Keller, my shark of an attorney, had summoned everyone to her office to sign the final vacancy agreement. This was to ensure they would actually leave the property so the new owners, an investment group paying cash, could take possession. I sat on one side of the long glass conference table. Naomi sat next to me, scrolling through her tablet with the calm demeanor of an assassin checking her inventory. On the other side sat my parents and Brielle. Brielle looked terrible. The glow of her triplet announcement had faded, replaced by blotchy skin and eyes that darted around the room like trapped mice. My mother, Darlene, was wearing black, as if mourning a death. My father, Gordon, just looked old. "We are not signing," Brielle announced, crossing her arms over her chest. "Not unless Madison agrees to buy out my share of the equity." Naomi didn't even look up. "You don't have equity, Ms. Alexander. You have occupancy." "I put work into that house," Brielle shouted. "I painted the nursery. I installed the custom shelving in the pantry. I landscaped the front garden. That is sweat equity. That added value to the sale price. I want $50,000 for my consulting and labor. Or we squat and force you to evict us through the sheriff, which will kill your sale." It was a bold threat. If they refused to leave, the cash buyers would walk, and I would be stuck paying the mortgage on a house occupied by hostile squatters for months. I looked at Naomi. She smiled. It was a terrifying smile. "We anticipated this," Naomi said. She reached into a file box on the floor and pulled out a thick binder. "Here is a breakdown of every renovation you claim credit for." Naomi opened the binder. Item 1. The pantry shelving. Invoice from the Container Store. Paid for by credit card, ending in 4491. That is Madison's card. Item 2. The nursery paint. Sherwin-Williams. Paid for by Madison's card. Item 3. The landscaping. A check written to Green Thumb Services, signed by Madison. Naomi slid the binder across the table. "You didn't do the work, Brielle," I said quietly. "You just spent the money. You hired people using my funds. That isn't sweat equity. That is project management. And you were over budget." I picked the colors, Brielle argued, her voice shrill. I created the vibe. That is intellectual property. It is beige paint, I said. It is not intellectual property. The door to the conference room opened. I expected it to be Naomi's paralegal. It was Evan. He looked different than he had at Thanksgiving. He wasn't wearing his mechanic's jumpsuit. He was wearing a button-down shirt and jeans. He looked cleaner, lighter, but his eyes were hard. Evan? Brielle gasped. She sat up straighter, fixing her hair. Baby, you came back. I knew you would. Tell them we need the money for the triplets. Evan didn't look at her. He looked at me. Naomi told me the meeting was today. He walked to the table and placed a single piece of paper down in front of Brielle. I called the wedding venue, Evan said. His voice was flat. The one we were supposed to get married at next month. The one I gave you a $5,000 deposit for. Brielle went pale. Evan, wait. They have no record of us, Evan said. You never booked it. You told me the date was set. You showed me a confirmation email. It was fake, wasn't it? Just like the HELOC application. I was going to book it, Brielle cried. I just needed to pay off one credit card first, so we could have a higher limit for the honeymoon. I was doing it for us. You spent the venue money on a purse, Evan said. I saw the transaction date. It matches the day you came home with that Louis Vuitton. He looked at my parents. Did you know? My mother looked down. She wanted to look nice for the wedding. Evan, a bride needs to feel confident. Evan laughed. A short, bitter sound. Right, confident. He turned back to Brielle. There is no wedding. Brielle, I canceled the florist. I canceled the DJ, and I'm not coming back to the house. But the babies, Brielle screamed. Playing her final desperate card, she grabbed his hand. You can't abandon your children. Triplets. Evan. 3 babies. How can I do this alone? I watched her face. I saw the panic in her eyes. It wasn't the panic of a mother worrying about her children. It was the panic of a liar running out of runway. About that, I said. Everyone turned to me. I spoke to the insurance company, I said. Since you are still on my policy as a dependent, something else I need to remove, I got the explanation of benefits for your ultrasound last week. Brielle froze. She stopped breathing. An ultrasound for multiples is billed differently than a singleton pregnancy, I said. Code 76801 versus 76815. I looked at the paper Naomi had handed me earlier. The billing code is for a single fetus, I said. The silence in the room was absolute. It was heavier than the silence at Thanksgiving. This was the silence of a foundational lie crumbling into dust. Evan looked at Brielle. He looked at her stomach. Aunt Brielle started to cry. But this time, there was no performance. She slumped in her chair, covering her face with her hands. I had to, she sobbed. I had to say it was triplets. The house was too small. Madison wouldn't buy the bigger one unless it was an emergency. Mom said if I made it sound like a crisis, you would have to help. And Evan, you were pulling away. I thought if it was 3, you would have to stay. I just wanted a bigger life. My mother gasped. I never told you to lie about the number of babies. I just said emphasize the space issue. You nodded, Brielle screamed at her. When I said triplets at the table, you clapped. You knew I was lying and you went along with it because you wanted the sunroom. My father, Gordon, made a sound. It was a deep, guttural sigh. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. 1 baby, Gordon muttered. We destroyed this family for 1 baby and a sunroom. You didn't destroy the family, I said. You just exposed it. I looked at Brielle. There are no triplets. There is no wedding. There is no equity. And in 3 days, there is no house. Please, my mother whispered. She reached across the table, trying to touch my hand. I pulled it back. Madison, please don't do this. Don't take it this far. We are losing everything. Your sister is pregnant, alone, and broke. Have mercy. Just stop. I am not taking it too far, I said. I am just stopping. I am stopping the payments. I am stopping the enabling. I am stopping the lies. I stood up. Here's the deal. This is the only offer on the table. You sign the vacancy agreement today. You move out by Friday. If you do that, I will not sue you for the back rent or the damages to the floors. I will walk away clean. But where will we go? My mother wept. We can't afford a deposit on a new place. I looked at my father. He looked broken. For the first time, I felt a twinge of pity. Not for my mother, not for Brielle, but for him. He was a weak man who had let himself be steamrolled by the women in his life until he had no spine left. I am selling the house for a profit, I said, because I paid down the principal. There will be proceeds. I took a breath. I am going to take a portion of those proceeds, $50,000, and put it into a medical trust for Dad. My mother's eyes lit up. 50,000? Oh, Madison, that is wonderful. We can... Not you. I cut her off. The trust will be managed by a third-party administrator. It can only be used to pay medical providers directly. Doctor bills, pharmacy copays. It cannot be withdrawn as cash. It cannot be used for rent. It cannot be used to buy a new purse. My mother's face fell. That is for Dad, I said, because he is sick, and I don't want him to die because you spent his heart medication money on a baby shower. I looked at Brielle. You get nothing. You have a degree you don't use. You have 2 hands. And you have 1 baby to fight for. Go get a job. I looked at Evan. I am sorry, Evan. He nodded slowly. Me too. Brielle picked up the pen. Her hand was shaking so badly she could barely hold it. She looked at me one last time. Her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resentment. She realized that the Bank of Madison was permanently closed. She signed. My parents signed. 3 days later, the house closed. The wire transfer hit my account. It was a substantial number. It was the return on my investment. Not just the financial investment, but the emotional investment of finally cutting the cord. My family moved into a 2-bedroom apartment on the other side of Charlotte. It was cramped. It had no sunroom. They had to sell Brielle's car to pay the deposit. I heard through the grapevine that Brielle got a job as a receptionist at a dental office. Real work, real hours. I didn't visit. On the first night in my new townhouse, I sat on my back porch. It was cold, the air smelling of pine needles and winter. I had blocked them on everything. My phone was quiet. My email was empty. For years, I had thought that love was a transaction. I thought that if I paid enough, fixed enough, and absorbed enough pain, I would purchase their affection. But looking at the moon rising over the trees, I realized the truth. You cannot buy what isn't for sale, and you cannot save people who are addicted to drowning. I went inside. I locked the door. I turned off the lights. I climbed into my bed. A bed I bought, in a room I rented, in a life I owned. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in 33 years, I didn't hear the guilt knocking at the door. I just heard the silence, and it sounded like freedom. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. Please drop a comment below with your city or country so we can see how far this story has traveled. If you enjoyed this journey of justice, please subscribe to the channel Kate Revenge Stories. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this video reach more people who need to hear that it is okay to say no. Stay strong and keep your receipts.